Hello, everyone. So happy to be here.
Lovely to see you, Rose. Lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us. I'm really excited to hear about how the role of the CMO is changing it has changed over the past 18 months and is changing again, evolving in future. So I know you've got some ideas you want to talk us through. One thing I want to touch upon, we haven't really talked a great deal about it over the last couple of days, but it's this concept of burnout that I mentioned earlier on, and the pressures that people are facing in these rather unique times. So just a quick question for you, really, Rose, in terms of what you are doing to combat stress and burnout over the last 18 months. What are you seeing work well for you?
That is a great question and something that I'm constantly thinking about for myself as well as for my team. And one of the things that I employ with my team is you've got to ruthlessly prioritize. There are a lot of great things that we're doing at work, but you got to balance that with what you need to do for your family, for you personally. And so it means that everything that you do should be prioritized, stacked, ranked, and ensure that you're always just working on those like top three things that are really going to impact your business and drive growth.
Yeah, be ruthless with those priorities. Somebody told me recently that priorities, plural, is a relatively recent invention. It was only priority up until some point in the 20th century.
Exactly.
Yeah, there we go. Well, Rose, many thanks for that. I'm going to hand over to you now. I'll be back to facilitate some questions later on. So, folks, queue your questions up for Rose. I'm sure that she'll be happy to answer anything you have to say. But for now, Rose, over to you. The floor is yours.
Awesome. Well, hi, once again, my name is Rose Gia, and it is such a pleasure and a privilege to be here today to talk to you guys about something that's super important to me. We titled this the Rise of the Renaissance Marketer and how marketing leaders can adapt to growth, but I'm going to talk about a bunch of other things as well. All right. So first, you're probably wondering, who is this Rose Gia person? Uh-oh. Apologies. Technical difficulties. But you're probably wondering who I am and why I'm here talking about growth and the Renaissance marketer. So first, I just want to say that, I've actually been driving growth my whole career. I started as an investment banker, and there I did a lot of kind of transactions, so mergers, acquisitions, debt, equity deals, all those types of things. And then I moved into corporate finance, where I was doing a lot of kind of growth driving through things like long range plans, investments. And finally, I found my calling in marketing. And to this day, I'm still kind of optimizing a lot of my strategies to ensure that I'm always driving growth for my businesses. So currently, I lead growth marketing for one of Amazon's fastest growing businesses called Ultra Fast Grocery, which includes brands like Amazon Fresh. This means that my team and I are responsible for driving top line growth at scale across the customer journey, on and offline. So as I'm going to go through the talk, I want to have you guys keep two questions in mind. The first one is, do you drive growth for your business or organization? And then the second question is, do you consider yourself a Renaissance marketer? Don't worry, I'm going to actually define the term later, but spoiler alert, the two are very much connected. So I want to first start with kind of growth and level setting on the definition. So what is it and what constitutes as growth? No matter what concept or framework you use, at the end of the day, growth is really about expansion. So whether it's through deepening your market penetration or increasing kind of the frequency at which your customers are shopping your brand, or it could be developing new products and services, it's still about expansion. And for me, expansion means that you're driving the P&L. And here you see on in the back, essentially a very quick and easy way of looking at the P&L. So you've got income or your revenues at the top, otherwise known as top line. This is typically where marketing drives growth. And then you take away the investments that you make into your business. So this could be anything from, capital expenditures to people investments, marketing investments, including brand, technology investments, data infrastructure, you name it. And then that's going to leave you with profit, which is also known as the bottom line. So what I want to do is I want to drill into the top line. So focusing there, we're really talking about the number of units and the dollar generated per unit. And now unit is any measure. So it could be number of customers, it could be your product sold, orders purchased, any of those pieces. And now that we've kind of have the baseline definition of growth, I want us to talk about how marketing fits into all of this. Now, marketing is about driving growth and expansion, but it's about doing it effectively. So I define efficacy as scale, which you see on the left, which is otherwise known as reach. And some of the proxy metrics that we typically use is things like impression volume, customers reach, the size of the market opportunity. And on the other side of this coin is efficiency, which is otherwise known as your return on investment. Now, depending on if you're thinking about, not online, if you're thinking about short-term or long-term returns, it looks like the slide is going by itself. Apologies, let me bring it back. We're really thinking about, anything from your engagement rate to the costs per customers acquired to long-term value. And when we're thinking about efficiency, it isn't just about advertising dollars. It's about any of the marketing that you do, from your owned and operated to organic to earned media. All of those pieces you can actually drive and find the ROI. All right, now back to this slide. So being a good marketing leader, one of the things that you are going to have to accept is that all of your marketing strategies and tactics will inevitably hit a point of diminishing returns. So to do things effectively, you're always going to have to be optimizing for the best outcome. And so the question is, how do you do that? And here's where we get to the best part of this presentation, which is you've got to hire and build Renaissance marketers. So first, I'm going to explain, why did I choose the word Renaissance? Well, Renaissance was a period of time where all these different disciplines kind of fused together. So we're talking about art, architecture, mathematics, science, all of that was coming together. So clearly you can see it in the side that you have on the left, Leonardo da Vinci. He was pretty much known as the quintessential Renaissance man, because not only was he an artist that was incorporating scientific art pieces into his artwork, but he was also an inventor, an architect, and a scientist. And like the great masters of the Renaissance period, we've got one of America's founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin. He was also someone of multiple disciplines, right? He was also an inventor. He created many things, including bifocals, but he was also a statesman. He was one of the people that was able to convince the rest of the world that our 13 fledgling states should be thought of as a nation. But the question is, what do all of these folks have in common? And they're now known as what we call polymaths. So psychology today broke down polymath into three parts. You've got breadth, which means that these folks know how things, wide-ranging knowledge, right, across multiple disciplines. But they've also got depth, which means that they, in a specific vertical, have a lot of knowledge in that area. And then third is integration, which means that they know how to bring together all of these different pieces of information from all these different disciplines and is able to then reshape and build something new, which leads to what I love, innovation. Now, innovation has oftentimes been equated with net new, never been seen ideas, but that is really rare. In the hundreds of thousands of years that we've been Homo sapiens, anything that you would consider net new has already been created, discovered, or at least thought of. And so when we think about innovation, it's not just about net new, right? It's about bringing together all of these different ideas and reshaping it in a new and different way, which is essentially what I call creativity. One of my favorite quotes from Professor Robert Bernstein about kind of what characterizes people who are creative is that they have this uncanny ability to discover connections between apparently unrelated domains of activity. So we're talking about the artist and the scientist, the sculptor and the mathematician, and the musician and the programmer. So sounds familiar? Well, this means that when you're trying to drive growth for your business, you need to innovate. And when you are innovating, you can't just be a marketer. You have to be what I call a Renaissance marketer, which means that you're clearly a marketer where you're, bringing together psychology and telling really engaging stories, but you've also got to be a data scientist, right? You got to be able to gather all of this customer data, build feedback loops. You also have to understand product management, so that way you know what is the right product and service for your customers and what it is that they're needing and wanting. And of course, very importantly, is you've also have to be a financier, right? You have to actually know all of your marketing activities, how it ties to top line growth. This means that you're going to have to shift your mindset from growth, which is implying infinite capacity to learn and grow, to what I call an investment mindset, which means that you understand that there are finite time, finite resources, and therefore you're going to have to make trade-offs. And that's where investments come in. I want to go deeper into the Renaissance marketer mindset, especially what is it? So first, in order for you to have this mindset, you're going to have to think multidisciplined, right? So you want to know how other kind of ideas from other parts of disciplines, from psychology to history to architecture, can all be infused and brought into marketing. You're also going to want to be able to understand all of the different components and functions of a business and how they all come together to bring innovation and growth. So this means knowing, how does brand and customer experience come together? How does data and finance help drive a lot of that growth? This also means that you need to be able to speak the language of your partners, right? In order to drive action. For example, if your finance partners, you're talking to your finance partners, you're gonna have to be able to tie your marketing activities to, to the top line, right? How does it drive your orders? How does it drive your sales? How does it drive the number of customers that you're acquiring? And where you're talking to product teams, you might want to just be the voice of the customer, but your goal is to be able to connect with the product teams to really ensure that they're building the right products based on what the customers actually want and actually need. The second part of this Renaissance marketer mindset is to be able to think long-term. So you have to treat your marketing investment you have to treat your marketing as an investment, which means you got to think like a VC. Ask those important questions like, why are you in the platforms that you're in? Is it because your customers are there? Is it because the platforms are growing? How are you thinking about your return on your investment? And how do you even define return? When you're thinking about investments, like I said before, it's not just about advertising. It's investments into people. It's investments into technologies, infrastructure, all of those things. You have to think about why it is that you're investing in those things. The other thing you have to think about when it comes to long-term is you have to adjust your vocabulary. As you've probably noticed, I don't use the word budget or spend. And this is because those words implies short-term thinking. And what you need to think is long-term. By using words like investment and investing, you're giving yourself the okay, especially with your partners, to think about investing in those upfront costs that are going to help drive growth later down the line. And you also have to think about partnerships. When you're partnering, you should be thinking about co-developing. So how do you make sure the platforms that you're investing in can actually be partners or extensions of your team, how they can co-develop products with you, so at the end of the day, they're building things for your use cases. And lastly, but very importantly, is you have to be able to balance short-term wins with long-term gains. I often get this question of like, but we have all of these, goals that we have to meet on an annual basis. How do we make sure that, we can still think long-term when we have to deliver in the short term? Well, my answer to that is you have to be additive. This means that everything you're building should be stackable. Another way of thinking about this is understand what is your long-term goal. 2 to 3 down the line? Is it to build a number of, X number of customers as your customer base? Is it to grow revenues by X amount? And then work backwards to figure out the milestones that you're going to be able to hit to reach those goals. And lastly, I would say, as part of this, balancing act, you're going to have to think about investing in the future. And when we think about investing in the future, right, we're talking about building foundations because technologies move very fast. Customers are very fickle. So in order for you to be able to understand how you're going to be relevant in the next 6 to 12 months, you have to have already built the foundations today. So think about SEO. What's your strategy there? What's your data infrastructure? And are you able to pull out the right customer insights? What is your reporting and mechanisms to ensure that everything you're building, all of those stackable initiatives, are actually doing the job that needs to be done? And of course, awareness. This is oftentimes, especially if you're in a company that is very data-driven, awareness kind of gets thrown out the window. But awareness is very important and it takes time to build. So it's very important for you to actually start thinking about it today. Now, the reason I say call out awareness in particular is because your customers, whether they're consumers or businesses, are people. And people tend to be more comfortable with what they're familiar with. And familiarity is brought about by consistent exposure to your brand. This means you will have to build everything from your brand architecture to your brand positioning, communication frameworks, as well as an integrated marketing plan. All right, now let's talk about the third, but also very important piece of the mindset, which is that you have to be able to balance the art and the science of marketing. Oftentimes, marketers tend to gravitate towards either the art, which we know very well as brand, creative design, or they gravitate all the way to the other end of science, which is oftentimes data, measurement, product, and automation. I want to drill into kind of the measurement, the science piece, because I feel like we oftentimes kind of forget what is the goal of that piece. So there's a phrase that I like to use, and apologies, this technical difficulties keeps moving the slides forward. But the thing I like to think about when it comes to the science portion is this idea of measure, test, and measure. So the first part of that is measure. So you have to accept that not everything you do is easily measurable, but that doesn't mean you can't build measurable proxies. What this means is, I'll give you guys an example. When I'm thinking about doing a out-of-home campaign, so think about billboards, but my goal is to drive, sales at a store. If I just try to immediately measure the billboard and whether or not that drove sales, that direct connection is really, really hard. But if I break it down into measurable pieces, it's different components, I'm able to then measure and then connect the dots. So for example, I might say, looking at just billboards, I'm going to use a third-party attribution platform to understand the number of customers who were exposed to the billboard, how many of them, what's the percentage that went into one of my physical stores. Now, separately, I'm going to have data that says, of all the folks that walked into one of my stores, what's the average rate at which they're coming out with sales? Now, with these two components put together, I can now directionally understand what it is that my out-of-home campaign is driving in terms of sales. The second piece of that measure, test, measure is test. So testing is all about rapid experimentation. This means you need to think about things like, how quickly are you measuring? Are you doing it fast enough so you can get those learnings? Because the more you learn, the more you can optimize. And that last piece of measure from measure, test, measure is that you need to reconsider what you're going to measure when. So not everything is measurable immediately, right? We just talked about awareness. We just talked about SEO. Those things take many, many months. And so you need to understand what can you measure today versus what you need to measure in 3 months, 6 months, 1 year down the line. This also means that you need to think about your customer and their journey. What are the components that they're going to go through, and how do you measure those components, and how do you stitch it all together? All right, so this is where the slide ends. Almost ends, where I'm not going to go through kind of all of these really amazing modern day Renaissance marketers. But what I'll tell you is, regardless what their title is, whether it's CEO or CMO, what they have in common is that Renaissance marketer mindset. They're multidisciplined. They pull from different places, from product, from architecture, from design, from marketing, from psychology, finance, you name it. And they're able to innovate and create new things, right? They don't just market and communicate to their customers. They build products, they build enhancements. They really think about what it is that their customers need at the end of the day. And like those Renaissance marketers, I leverage this mindset every day. And it's my hope that everyone will be able to adopt this mindset in the future. And so here's my plug, which is, if you are interested in learning how to build and hire these Renaissance marketers, please sign up at renaissancemarketer.com. And I will leave you now with this first question going into our Q&A, which is, now that you've heard all of this talk, do you consider yourself a Renaissance marketer?
Great stuff. Many thanks, Rose. Listen, a fascinating story. Some great ideas there. We're getting the questions queued up for you now from our audience. Just a quick question from me to kick things off. I love this idea of the polymath and you know, how that translates to the Renaissance marketer. And I can see this working really well for leaders, marketing leaders, of course. But what does this mean for marketing teams? You know, is there still room for specialism? Do you still need those deep areas of expertise, or actually, when you're looking to hire, should you be looking for this more multidisciplined approach?
That is a great question, and my answer to that is yes. You know, there are different, in the past, there are different ways of characterizing this Renaissance marketer, right? So people have said that they're the general athletes that can do everything well, you know, versus the specialists. And the reason I honed in on Renaissance marketer is that multidiscipline is super important. And when you're hiring, or even within your team, what I'll tell you is almost everyone has this inside themselves. I've actually never met a marketer who didn't have at least one aspect of the Renaissance marketer mindset already embedded. And oftentimes they might not have all of the different disciplines, but they are willing to learn. And so when you're hiring, you know, really look at their history, really ask them questions like, you know, what are some innovative ideas that you've brought to the table? What are things that you did outside of your scope? And those are going to get you to a place where you can then identify, is this someone who has that multidiscipline part of that Renaissance marketer mindset? And in terms of developing talent, you know, it really is, as a marketing leader, you've got to walk the walk, right? You have to be the person that is bringing together all of the different functions to ensure everyone's working together. Marketers have often, you know, depending on the business that you're in, sometimes are relegated to its own world where you're building lots of campaigns, but you're not really tying everything back together. So it is the job of the marketing leader to ensure that you are kind of the hub of bringing everything together. And so it's important to ensure that data, product, finance, legal, compliance, and of course your marketing organization are all together, building together and innovating together.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. So it's not necessarily about hiring the specific skills, but more hiring the capacity to be able to learn those skills and bring them together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful stuff. Okay, Rose, thanks very much. We've got some questions lined up. So I think first of all, we will go to Jordan over at Nativo. Good morning, Jordan. Great to see you.
Morning. Good to see you as well.
Thanks for joining us. What's your question for Rose, Jordan?
Sure. Thanks, Rose. Great presentation. I was just curious. You obviously you have a background where you come to your current role with financial chops. So I'm curious. There's a lot of different disciplines that it takes to be good at being a Renaissance marketer. For those that maybe come through a more traditional, marketing track or content track or sales track or product track, how do you get good at the other stuff? Is sort of the question.
I love it. This is such a great plug. On renaissancemarketer.com, that's actually one of the things that we're building, which is everything from kind of the language that you need to use with your partner teams, as well as kind of some of the most important pieces of those other disciplines that you need to grab and bring to the table. So one of the things I love about, calling it the Renaissance marketer mindset is that it is about the opening of your mind and the willingness to learn. And so when it comes to, you don't have, and earlier when I showed that slide about a polymath, right? You don't have to have depth of knowledge across all of the different disciplines. You just have to have breadth, which means that if you understand the fundamentals of those disciplines, what really matters in those disciplines, then you know how to bring that in. And at the end of the day, you don't need to be building this on your own. You should be working with your finance partner who will be building those key models for you. You don't have to actually go in and build it, but you should understand what they're thinking about and how they're thinking about the P&L and whether or not you can bring that. Same with product, right? You don't need to go out and build the product, but as the marketer, you should be able to understand what product thinks about that's most important and how does marketing fit in to really drive the best use of that product. So like I said, great question and a great plug for what I'm trying to build. There will be resources that will be helping, and we are developing a curriculum that marketing leaders can take to their teams, where we will be going through each of the disciplines and really bringing that kind of breadth of scope to the table.
Thanks, Rose.
Appreciate it.
Jordan, perhaps I can just ask for a follow-up to you as well. Obviously, we're talking about developing teams and bringing in all of this kind of wealth of skills, breadth of skills. How are you approaching that at your own organisation? How are you developing people with these multidisciplinary skills?
That one for me or that for Rose? You want me to handle that one?
Yeah, for you, Jordan. Yeah, just to get kind of your perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting because and part of my question is that we've been hiring of late, and my sense is we go to market thinking about very specific skills and backgrounds, and that's not, and I think that is probably more common. I don't want to assume, but I think in our industry, you want someone who has done certain things. We're looking at resumes, right, or LinkedIn. So I don't know that we're doing a wonderful job of that. I will say that we are trying to do a better job of bringing different disciplines together to at least have more exposure, which is challenging in the current times, but to learn about what people are working on. I do think that's sort of the path to how we'll get there, so that the folks that we have on the team already, regardless of what role you're in, have more exposure and understanding to some of the different skills and projects and best practices and all sort of the cutting edge stuff that, again, it sounds like you don't need to be an expert in, but you need to know enough to be dangerous so that you can build those sorts of partnerships. So I think we're getting there, but I do think it really starts with how you hire and who you hire, and then also how you act as a team.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Rose, I can see you nodding along there. Maybe just a follow-up question to you now, Rose. Obviously, it sounds like a great approach that Jordan's taking. And we're hearing a lot about D&I, diversity and inclusion. Is this something we maybe need to kind of, I don't mean this flippantly, but maybe build into that idea of D&I, diversity of viewpoints and perspectives and backgrounds and experiences? Can that type of approach help in this instance?
Absolutely. Diversity, diversity is super important, and diversity of mindset is really important. And I think that is essentially kind of what I've been pushing for with this Renaissance marketer mindset, is that diversity of thought. And the reason is, if you think about innovation, right, and that I talked about before, innovation nowadays is really about bringing together all these different pieces, being able to say there was an amazing, platform that was built for another vertical that actually might work for my industry, right? Being able to kind of connect those dots. And so I think when it comes to an organization, it is very important to allow your teams to develop things outside of their scope. And so this, I'll tell you a quick, brief story of my background. Because I was a finance person, when I first went into marketing, I felt the calling, but nobody around me understood why. And so there was a lot of tension of, oftentimes a lot of marketing leaders were saying, because you're finance, you won't know marketing. And the what you're bringing to the table is too finance. It's like, it's all about the numbers. Like we need more creativity. And what I learned was actually, because of my finance background and my diversity of thought, I was able to say, actually, every year when finance is thinking about how much money to give to different departments, the first thing they're going to ask is, what am I getting? What are we as a business getting as a return? And so by bringing in this different thought of bringing in finance and saying, actually, I know how to tie back every marketing activity to a dollar amount. Even though it'll take me 20 steps to get there, I know how to tie it back. I was able to get more basically spending money in terms of being able to invest in the future for my department. And so I've seen this happen quite often where folks that came from a gaming background would go into healthcare and say, this is how we're going to gamify. This is how we're going to get people to really take those small nudgeable actions, because I've learned how to do it from a gaming perspective, but now I know how to bring it to the table in a different vertical. So I think it's super important when we're thinking about diversity, not only of the person, their cultural backgrounds, but also their mindset.
Yeah, fantastic. Many thanks, Rose, and thanks for the question, Jordan. Much appreciated. Good stuff. Rose, one final question from me, just before we wrap things up here. If you were to leave the audience here today with, one or two nuggets or key recommendations as they look to get started on this journey of becoming polymath leaders, what would that advice be?
So I would say my key takeaway is, don't shy away from trying this and having your team really be able to develop this skill set. One of the questions that I typically get is like, well, why would I do it? How do I measure the kind of impact that someone having a Renaissance marketer mindset would have? And I'll tell you, it's actually quite measurable. So you can look at things like productivity increase by X%. So when I employed, this type of thinking, I was able to bring down go-to-market from taking 6+ months, 6 to 12 months, sometimes depending on, what business you're in, down to 3 months, right? Because we were quickly able to adopt and adapt to different thinking. We got all the partners to agree much faster because we understood what the partners and our partner teams needed. So we knew what legal needed, what finance needed, and that reduced our go-to-market. So productivity increased. You can also measure top line, right? So what was your top line results increase by? And here, think about this as like, somebody who's able to use all of their ideas to build new innovative products. So I'll give you another example. I had folks that were able to, again, find new platforms in which we reach new customers, increasing our customer reach by 200%, because they were able to say, hey, based on my background, having played again gaming, we believe actually Twitch, for example, is a really great place to be. But historically, our business has always been in the traditional social sphere and haven't really thought about going into a new platform. So those are kind of very measurable ways that you can show impact for having this mindset. And that's kind of what I will kind of take away or leave with you guys is, think about adopting this mindset. Think about making sure your teams feel comfortable adopting this mindset, and you will see impact and you will be able to measure that impact.
Wonderful stuff. Rose, many thanks for kicking things off here this morning. Fascinating stuff and a great start to our final day. Many thanks.